so good to see you this morning, and I loved your book. What an insight. What a life you're having. Good morning.
Good morning, Lorraine. It's lovely to be on your show. I've always longed to be on your show, and here I am.
Oh,
and my dear cousin, Tom Lester, has allowed me to speak to you from the terrace at Holkham.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And it's a most beautiful day here.
It's a gorgeous day, and you look incredible. And what I loved about this book is we start right from the fact that you were a maid of honour at the Queen's Coronation, which was extraordinary. And you give us such an insight into what was going on that day, and also the fact that, you know, at one point you were quite overwhelmed. You almost fainted, and that would have been a disaster.
Well, it would have been too awful. The thing is, I hadn't had anything to eat, really, and I'd slept the night before the coronation. I slept on the floor on a mattress, and we got up very, very early, and I thought I was going to be all right, but very, very luckily, we were all standing, and I was standing at the back against a pillar, and a wonderful man called Black Rod, who had a sort of billiard cue in his hand, he saw me swaying about like this, and so he pinioned me to the pillar and saved the day. He said it was his last battle. He was an eminent soldier. So anyway, it all was fine. And I'm glad you liked the chapter on the coronation, because although I took part in it, of course, I was so busy concentrating on what I had to do that I wasn't really seeing what everybody else was doing. So I had a lovely time writing the chapter, finding out and reading about, you know, what everybody else had done.
And we get a real snapshot of your life, especially when you talk about the crown, because obviously you featured in that. We saw, you know, you were portrayed in that, and you talked a lot to Helena Bonham Carter, who played Princess Margaret. Do you think that she did her justice?
Oh, I do, because Helena, I've always known. She was a cousin of my husband, Colin, and she rang me up and said, could I come and see you? And she said, I'm playing Princess Margaret, and I'd like to come and talk to you. And it was wonderful. She came, she spent 3 hours with me. She took a lot of notes, and in the end, I just felt that Princess Margaret was in the room with us. Aww. And she wrote me such a nice letter afterwards. You know, she said, I hope Princess Margaret will be a good a friend to me as she was to you.
Oh, that's lovely.
And I probably wrote the book. I just wanted to put the record straight about Princess Margaret, about what a really good friend she'd been to me. And there'd been so much rubbish written about her.
Yes, to put the record straight. I get that completely. Yeah, completely. You and your husband Colin, you introduced Princess Margaret to the island of Mystique, of course, and Mystique was where she was, I think, the happiest. She could just be herself. You know, she was very, very happy there. I mean, I'm sure you must have great memories.
Well, tremendous memories, and I've always taken a lot of photographs. I've got a huge number of photograph books, and I sometimes look at them, brings back all the memories. Oh. And of course, the house that Colin gave her and the land was the only house she owned, and she really, really loved it. I think some of the happiest times she ever had were on Mystique. And all the people in the Caribbean loved her too. They always used to call her our princess. And she loved dancing to the reggae bands, and we had a lovely time.
Yeah, that comes across loud and clear in the book. Lots of incredible stories, lots of really good times, but a lot of heartache as well. I mean, you talk about your eldest son, Charlie, who very sadly, I mean, he did so well, he overcame drug addiction, but sadly he died, and your son, Henry, also, you lost him back in the 80s, and he had AIDS when it wasn't understood and there wasn't enough treatment there. So having to revisit those times in the book, very important that you did that, but very tough, I would think.
Well, it was. I'm very glad I did write about it, because, especially because they each had a son, and I sent it to their sons. They were quite small when their fathers died, and I didn't hear anything, so I rang Ewan up. I said, have you read the book? And I was slightly nervous, and he said, yes, Gran. He said, I cried a lot, but I'm so glad you wrote about it, because nobody really ever told me about my father and the disease. And I think it was very difficult for people perhaps nowadays to understand, or perhaps it's not, because it was a disease that we didn't know how it was caught, and people were really, really frightened of it. I mean, rather like the virus now. You know, it was a very, very frightening time.
It was.
And people, you know, yeah.
And you write about that with such with such care and such sorrow, but at the same time with great understanding, Now, your husband, Colin, I think larger than life doesn't really do him justice. What an extraordinary man. I don't really know.
What are you going to ask me?
Well, you know, on your honeymoon, he takes you to Paris, for goodness sake, but it wasn't very romantic, was it?
No, because I left this house. I had my wedding here. And in fact, there was a photograph of me, you can't see it, but it's just out of view, the fountain. And it's a wonderful day. There were 3 tents in the park. The tenant farmers were in one, all the workers were in another, all our friends were upstairs. And it was magical. And off we went to Paris. Well, I won't go into it, but it was an absolute disaster. For some reason, Colin thought that it would do me good in some way to go to this really awful, horrible smelling brothel he took me to.
I know, and it's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. He behaved like a toddler, and then sometimes, you know, he would have tantrums, but then you were so brilliant with him, and somehow you stayed together, but then when he died, he left you with nothing.
Well, I know. That was a final humiliation, really. No, but I loved him, and in those days you didn't get you stuck with it. You know, we had 5 children, and you know, and he was wonderful in lots of ways. You know, I look back at very fond memories, but he did have this other side to him, which was very difficult. But I mean, I'm the sort of generation. You know, I'm not a snowflake. You know, one doesn't give in. And I once said to him, "Why did you marry me?" And he said, "Because I knew you would stick with me."
You see, he knew, and so you did, through all kinds of things, You were also with Princess Margaret all the way through, and when she was very, very ill, I love this story in the book, when she was really sick, the Queen went to visit her. You know, obviously went to see her sister, but the Queen was actually quite cross because Princess Margaret told her to be quiet.
Well, the thing was that Princess Margaret was in bed and the Queen came and I waited in the drawing room. I'd show the Queen went up, and quite soon I could hear the Queen coming downstairs. So I went out and I said, "Is everything all right, ma'am?" And she said, "Well, no, it isn't actually, because Princess Margaret is listening to the Archers, and every time I say something, she just says, 'Shush.'" So anyway, I went up and turned the wireless off and saw they both had a cup of tea. So it all ended all right.
It did, but I love that. I love that. She's probably the only person in the world that could tell her sister to be quiet. I'm listening to the Archers, which is just incredible. The Queen, of course... Yeah, it's remarkable. The Queen never changed, total constant, you know, sense of duty, all of that. And that admiration you have for her comes out loud and clear too.
Well, it certainly does. I mean, I felt so honoured to have been chosen as a maid of honour. And, I mean, I just have such great admiration for the Queen. She's never put a step wrong, and she sort of holds the whole royal family together, really. And I don't see her now very often, but when I do, it's a great joy. I think she's fantastic, I really do. And being part of the coronation is something that I will never forget. It was, I suppose, the most amazing thing I've ever done. People say, "Oh, was your wedding the best thing?" And I say, well, actually, it wasn't. It was a coronation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's history, absolute history. You never stop. You're in your 80s and you never stop. And you've just written a new book set in Mystique, a sort of mystery book, you know, and that's going to be coming out, what, at the end of the year, hopefully?
Yes, it's going to be in time for Christmas, so everybody can buy it for Christmas. I'm the new sort of aristocratic Miss Marples. I'm called Lady Veronica, which is my second name, Lady V for short. And I solve these crimes with a very, very dishy black detective in Mystique. It's great fun. I've had great difficulty in deciding who the victims are going to be.
But
Colin isn't actually one of them in the book.
You could have got your revenge. You could. Do you know what?
Well, he might. Well, he might have been. I mean, I long to have him as the first victim, but actually, I haven't got him very much in my book. Otherwise, you just take it over. Yeah. So he's sitting in St. Lucia, ringing me up in an irritating way. Anyway, I think it's going to be quite fun.
I think it's going to be amazing. I wish I had half your energy and enthusiasm. Do you know what I think you would be? If you ever want a change of career, you would be the best agony aunt ever, because nothing would shock you. You don't judge people, and you've got such a wealth of experience that you could pass on to them. That's what I think you should do.
Well, what a good idea. Well, I've been looking for a second something to do, so I might take you up on that.
Do you know what? I loved the book. I absolutely did, Anne. It was fantastic and so good to talk to you. I mean, we've got so many stories in there, so many stories. What a life you're having. And enjoy everything you do, and I'm sure you do. You're the kind of person that seizes the day.
Well, I'm having the most marvellous time. I don't think I've ever been so happy in my life. It's fantastic for having a career at I'm going to be 88 next week.
Wow.
And I've just never had so much fun.
You've cheered me up. You're an absolute tonic. Thank you so much. And Anne's book, Lady in Waiting. Yep, great to see you. My Extraordinary Life in the Shadow of a Crown is out today in paperback. What a remarkable woman